The ultimate mystery club, picture this. No flag, no anthem, not even a decent logo on their business cards. Yet just one word, assassin, was enough to make medieval kings wet their royal beds at night. For over 150 years, they moved like shadows, struck without warning, and vanished faster than your motivation on Monday morning. They went by many names: the Nizari, the Ismailis, the Hashin. That last one stuck like a bad reputation, forever tied to blood, darkness, and the kind of secrets that would make a conspiracy theorist weep with joy. Who were they? Why did they kill? And why can't history give us a straight answer even today? Buckle up, because we're diving into the story of history's most exclusive and deadly to book club. Chapter 1. Hassan-i Sabbah's Mountain Startup. While great empires were busy measuring their worth in the square miles and body counts, a small group quietly built something different in Persia's Alborz Mountains. They had no nation, no massive army, but they possessed the medieval equivalent of going viral, the power to make people absolutely terrified. Meet Hassan-i Sabbah, scholar, thinker, and the kind of guy who gets kicked out of religious institutions for asking too many uncomfortable questions. He didn't want to be a prophet or conquer the world like every other ambitious medieval dude. Instead, he chose the ultimate long game: patience, strategy, and really good PR through fear. At Alamut Fortress, which he acquired not through force but through what we now call a hostile takeover with extra cunning, Hassan began training men who would literally reshape history. And here's the kicker: survivors of assassination attempts would say these killers were weirdly calm, like, "I'm about to die, but this is totally fine." Calm. Imagine being a medieval king and your assassin doesn't even look stressed about the whole situation. That's not just terrifying, that's profoundly unsettling. Chapter 2. The Art of Strategic Fear Management. In a world where power meant, how many people can I make bleed? Component placement, the assassins needed only one blade and one person willing to die to completely flip the script. They weren't fighting nations, they were fighting the entire system where might makes right. Hassan-i Sabbah knew they'd lose any direct war faster than you can say medieval warfare. So they became invisible, letting their enemies destroy themselves through pure paranoia. This wasn't just tactics, it was philosophy with a body count. Inside Alamut, they didn't just train people to stab things effectively. The Fidai, literally those ready to sacrifice themselves, talk about job dedication, studied philosophy, strategy, and developed an unshakable belief in their mission. They weren't mindless killers, they were the armed wing of a think tank, because they sought no reward, no fame, and left behind nothing but very dead targets. Predicting them was impossible. Anyone could be next. No one was too important to reach. The brilliance? They planted nameless dread that made enemies weaken themselves through constant paranoia. Chapter 3. Alamut, medieval Silicon Valley, but with more daggers. Alamut wasn't built from stone alone. It was built from the quiet stubbornness of people who believed the world could be changed not through armies, but through really committed individuals with sharp objects. Perched on a cliff that seemed to balance on the edge between still technically on Earth and nope, Alamut became part fortress, part laboratory, part philosophical debate club with lethal consequences. Training there was like the world's deadliest university program. Young recruits, some barely 15, weren't taught how to kill. They learned why they might need to die. They studied philosophy, theology, strategy, and probably the medieval equivalent of how to win friends and influence people before stabbing them. Legend says Hassan created a fake paradise to motivate recruits. Show them incredible pleasures, then say, "This is your reward for ultimate loyalty." Historians debate if this literally happened, but honestly, the order mastered something scarier than fake paradise. They mastered belief. Once someone believes death leads to eternal reward, fear becomes irrelevant. Training included disappearing into crowds, posing as servants, pilgrims, even disabled beggars. Anything to get close to targets. No grand weapons needed. A hidden dagger, poisoned needle, single strike to the heart. Boom. Dead king. But killing was never the point. The message was. No matter how powerful you think you are, invisible hands can reach your throat anytime. That precision made them terrifying because nobody knew how to defend against appointment-only murder. Chapter 4. The Greatest Hits Album. No drums, no war declarations, no marching armies. Just noblemen suddenly dropping dead in crowds, blood pooling as they stepped out of mosques or sat on thrones. Entire kingdoms would tremble, and only one rumor echoed: the men of Alamut have acted. Their first blockbuster hit? Nizam al-Mulk, Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire, basically the medieval equivalent of a prime minister with anger management issues. In 1092, while on pilgrimage, a stranger disguised as a wandering mystic approached and delivered one precise stab. The assassin died immediately after, but the message was crystal clear. This wasn't just murder, it was political earthquake engineering. One dagger, entire empire destabilized. Years followed with more prominent figures dropping dead in increasingly bold circumstances. Not shadows and secrecy, broad daylight, full witnesses, as if designed to echo across continents. Some died while preaching, others in private homes during secret meetings with trusted advisors. The crown jewel? Conrad of Montferrat, powerful Christian noble who became king of Jerusalem for exactly a few days before two men stabbed him to death in the streets. They didn't run. They accepted execution like it was a scheduled appointment. Some rulers were literally forced to pay protection money, sending gifts and secret treaties, hoping to avoid becoming statistics. The assassins became more than terrorists. They were a hidden political force that could influence appointments, alliances, even royal successions through the simple threat of really inconvenient death. Chapter 5. The Invisible Network, Medieval Internet of Murder. Here's where things get spooky. The assassins operated a communication network that makes modern encryption look primitive. No carrier pigeons, no official couriers, yet messages traveled across deserts and mountains, arriving precisely when needed. Commands moved through looks, phrases, objects placed just so. A dagger wedged in a doorframe, an engraved coin, cloth tied to a tree. To outsiders, meaningless. To fidei, survival codes, proof they weren't alone in this invisible war. The assassins almost never left written records. When they did, everything was hidden in poetry, Quranic verses, or symbols that seemed random. This is why historians struggle, not because there's nothing to find, but because everything is wrapped in so many layers of meaning, nobody can say what's actually real. Their hierarchy was tighter than your jeans after Thanksgiving. New recruits knew only basics. Do task, ask no questions. Higher ranks might know target details, but only a handful saw the full picture. If captured, torture was useless because people literally didn't know more than their tiny piece. Even the mighty Seljuk Empire's spies failed spectacularly. Some vanished entirely. Others returned with thousand-yard stares, unable to explain what they'd seen or hadn't seen. Here's the weird part. No one ever defected. No fidei was captured and spilled secrets. Fear, loyalty, or maybe they truly believed even in prison, the order was still watching. Either way, it worked for nearly 2 centuries. Chapter 6. The Philosophy of Acceptable Death. Of all the weird things about the assassins, perhaps none shocked the world more than this. Fidei embraced death like it was a career promotion. They never asked for rewards, didn't demand safe passage, showed zero concern for survival after completing missions. One strike, one final glance, then calm acceptance of execution. As if death were the satisfying final chapter of their life story. Why? The answer isn't in weapons or discipline, it's in their faith and philosophy. Fidei weren't trained to kill, they were trained to understand why they must kill. Once that reason rose above self-preservation, death lost its sting. Ismaili faith, followed by the assassins, was like Islam's philosophical cousin who asked too many questions at family dinners. They believed in hidden truths passed down through spiritual lineages, sacred knowledge most people couldn't access. Hassan-i Sabbah built not just a stronghold, but a school where knowledge, belief, and sacrifice merged into people who lived for something greater than themselves. To Fidai, the world wasn't just trials and tribulations. It was a grand stage where every act carried meaning beyond time. Strike down a tyrant, you're breaking links and chains of oppression stretching across centuries. Die in the process? You're not vanishing into nothing but returning to eternal light where all sacrifice is remembered. Some records describe Fidai spending entire nights in prayer before missions, fasting, purifying body and mind. No trembling, no rage, no begging. They walked forward like they'd already seen their fate and made peace with it. Chapter 7. The Long Game. Literally decades long. Patience was their superpower. Some Fidai spent their entire youth getting one step closer to targets. One chilling account tells of a Fidai who spent 13 years inside the Seljuk court, rose to become a trusted advisor, even commanded a fortress in the king's name. Then one day, while sharing tea in a quiet study, he calmly reached into his sleeve and plunged a dagger into his target's heart, then sat back down, waited for arrest, and smiled at the guards. 13 years. Over a decade of method acting so complete he may have forgotten where the character ended and he began. That's not just infiltration, that's psychological warfare through extreme commitment to the bit. When anyone could be a killer and no one could be trusted, kings doubted ministers, generals doubted soldiers, fathers doubted sons. In that collapse of trust, the assassins didn't need to strike again. The world tore itself apart in fear. These infiltrations weren't always about killing. Some Fidai entered other religions, studied doctrines, participated in rituals, even preached sermons, not to kill, but to observe, pass messages, or plant ideological seeds that would later confuse and divide. How do you live two opposing lives without losing your mind? Absolute belief. When you believe every act serves a grand design, you can be anyone, do anything, as long as the mission gets fulfilled. Chapter 8. Crusades, the ultimate crossover event. To Western eyes, the Crusades were sacred war to reclaim the Holy Land. In reality, it was chaos incarnate. Islamic kingdoms fractured, Christian crusader states constantly shifting, conquering, betraying, reconquering. Amid this storm existed the assassins. No flag, no army, no territorial ambitions, yet feared by both sides. At first, crusaders didn't get it. The enemy was supposed to be Islam, right? Then suddenly their own leaders were getting assassinated without cause. Not on battlefields, but in streets, at weddings, while quietly eating dinner. Conrad of Montferrat's assassination perfectly illustrates this. Powerful Crusades figure, elected king of Jerusalem, murdered days later by two men who approached him in a marketplace and stabbed him to death in broad daylight. Before execution, one smiled and whispered something in an unknown language. What terrified Christian kingdoms wasn't just the boldness, it was unclear motive. Why would a Muslim order kill a potential ally? Because assassins didn't care about Christian versus Muslim. They only cared about who threatened their ideal. The Crusades were perfect hunting grounds. While both sides slaughtered and plundered, assassins maintained fragile balance through strategic murder and secret negotiations. Some Crusader leaders even sent tribute to Alamut seeking protection. Legend says King Richard the Lionheart sent Hassan-i Sabbah a message asking him to stop targeting English troops. Hassan didn't respond with a letter. He responded with a dagger placed beside the envoy's bed, in a note. If I wished it, this would be in your heart. Chapter 9. The Women Behind the Shadows. History remembers sword wielders but forgets water carriers, message deliverers, and those who stayed strategically silent. In scattered assassin records, women's names are almost invisible, but that doesn't mean they weren't crucial. Inside Alamut, women played quiet but essential roles. They didn't carry out killings but nurtured, educated, and trained Fidai. Documents reveal many Ismaili women held deep knowledge of medicine, herbs, and antidotes, essential for preparing assassins for missions. In organizations built on secrecy, the least suspected often hold the most power. Legends tell of Fidai posing as newlywed wives, living with targets for months before striking. No one suspected women. No one thought gentle eyes could hide death sentences. Ancient writings speak of library keepers at Alamut, believed to be highly educated women tasked with preserving secret knowledge, maps, codes, and religious texts, layered with hidden meanings. They were flame keepers, ensuring order ideals survived no matter how often enemies tried burning everything down. Women in the assassin order weren't treated as property like in many medieval societies. They accessed knowledge, trained in critical thought, and were entrusted with secrets. This breaking of gender roles allowed the order flexibility and concealment for nearly 2 centuries. Their sacrifice was never written down, but it's etched deep into the order's soul, a soul history has yet to fully acknowledge. Chapter 10. The Mongol Solution. Every empire thinks it can last forever, but the Mongols had different ideas. Unlike other enemies who relied on sieges or diplomacy, Hulagu Khan brought unmatched siegecraft and zero interest in negotiation. When Mongols set sights on Alamut, they weren't intimidated by mysterious assassins or invisible networks. They brought the medieval equivalent of nuke it from orbit, overwhelming, brutal, systematic destruction. For nearly 200 years, Alamut had never fallen to outside force. Those who tried often withdrew in doubt. But Mongols didn't doubt. They just kept coming with engineering that made stone walls irrelevant. In the end, Alamut fell not in glory but in silence. When Mongols entered, they found an empty shell. No leaders captured, no treasure, no ideology uncovered. Just scorched walls and defaced symbols, as if history was trying to hide what had lived there. Though Alamut crumbled and assassins disbanded, their legacy survived. No army, no matter how brutal, can kill an idea. And the assassins, though no longer organized, lived on in whispers, strange assassinations, and secrets buried beneath empire ashes. Chapter 11. The Transformation. Here's the plot twist. The assassins never really died. They transformed. Like open source code belonging to no one, the assassin mindset can live in anyone following one principle. Act with purpose in silence, not for self, but for truth beyond self. Look at today's world. Human rights activists appearing from nowhere, dropping shocking truths, then vanishing into data fog. Whistleblowers inside massive institutions risking everything to bring evidence to light. They carry no daggers, don't live on mountaintops, but their motives and methods feel eerily familiar. There are organizations today with no leaders, no headquarters, no hierarchy, yet they unsettle governments and global power brokers. They operate through encryption, distributed knowledge, and strict rules. No one holds full truth alone. The assassins don't need to exist in old form. They're reborn through behavior, structure, thought. In an age where everything is monitored, the best way to hide is in plain sight. Chapter 12. The Modern Echo. We live in a world of satellite surveillance and AI that knows our thoughts before we do. You'd think there's no room for those who choose to hide. But strangely, in this era of total surveillance, the shadow of assassins becomes more visible than ever. The more we connect, the more we're watched. Every step, search, message leaves traces. We don't live in Fortress. We live in global glass house where every behavior can be measured and redirected. A teenager with headphones, eyes on glowing screen, sometimes isn't just playing games. They're living resistance the real world no longer allows, being outside the system. In games, film, fiction, the assassin appears as invisible companion, whispering. Personal freedom is still possible in a pre-programmed world. This shows up whenever someone limits sharing, chooses privacy mode, encrypts messages, leaves social media, or covers webcam lens. These aren't random acts. They're modern signals of silent rebellion, resurrection of assassin spirit. When someone uses VPN to mask location, when journalists encrypt conversations to avoid surveillance, when anonymous coders uncover scandals and release them to the world, they don't call themselves fidei, but they're living the same spirit. Chapter 13. The Question That Never Dies. There are symbols that exist because of power. Some endure through victory, but rare ones live simply because they ask questions no one dares answer. The assassins were one of them. They chose paradox. Kill to protect life, vanish to preserve truth, make no declaration, but force the world to notice. Within that paradox, they awakened doubt, because every human, no matter what system they live in, carries primal suspicion. What if everything around me is wrong? When systems become too vast, too tight, too perfect. We don't know where to look or who to ask. So we go silent. In that silence, assassins emerge, not with answers, but with courage to ask questions for us. They never demanded belief, never preached, never apologized. They acted and disappeared, leaving cuts not just on flesh but across history's current. Single incisions, thin and silent, yet deep enough to make empires stop and fear again. Conclusion: the eternal question mark. We've walked through a story with no clear beginning and no real end, because assassins were never meant to be complete legend. They were emptiness, deliberately carved by absence. In a world where every power wants to be seen, known, praised, they chose to leave behind only questions. Questions not written on paper, but living in weary eyes of kings who found daggers on pillows, in sudden law changes, in quiet deaths with no known cause. We may never know full truth. Maybe we're not supposed to, because sometimes what matters isn't their story, but the feeling they leave in us. Unnamed feeling that makes us hesitate when voices get too loud, power gets too quiet, or someone walks against current not for fame or gain, but because they see something wrong. If assassins left any true legacy, it wasn't daggers or fortresses or coded symbols. It was human ability we all have but few dare use. Courage to stand alone in silence for what's right. The assassins were never just historical curiosity. They were condition of human mind, the part that always wants truth, afraid knowing it might cost everything. Between those forces, we make quiet decisions to live less exposed, just like they did. There may no longer be daggers in dark, but each time we question personal freedom, right to privacy, trust in systems, each time we do that, shadows of group who lived through silence and willpower live again inside us. And maybe that's their greatest victory. Not the empires they toppled or kings they killed, but the whisper they planted in human consciousness that some things are worth protecting, even if no one will ever thank you for it. The assassins didn't just disappear into history. They became part of how we think about power, resistance, and the price of truth. They became the question mark at the end of every system that claims perfection. And in a world increasingly surveilled, increasingly controlled, increasingly predictable, maybe we need those question marks more than ever.